Incidents of domestic abuse and gender-based violence continue to tear communities apart in South Africa. Despite many social education campaigns, countless women remain immersed in continuous cycles of abuse, which for some results in death. Time and again, there are debates and calls for the justice system to be overhauled with the aim of providing a cushion for victims of abuse. But are we making any headway? Tonight, we focus on this all too agonizing topic of gender-based violence as we assess the effectiveness of the tools we have at hand and strategies that are being deployed. Gender and social activist Lebo Ramafoku joins us. She is alongside research and project consultant at the University of Johannesburg, Lisa Vetten, as well as gender-based violence survivor Nellies and Jiva and Tamara Matebula, who is the chairperson of the Commission for Gender Equity. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time tonight here on the Newsfeed Late Nights to have this conversation and to really interrogate some of the strategies we are employing at this current moment and whether or not they are effective. But first, before we get into the conversation, Nellies, I'd like to start with you and your story as a survivor of gender-based violence and how the system has responded to you and whether you find it to be effective. Just relate for us a little bit briefly your story and how you've been interacting with the system.
Good evening, Phil. My case traumatized me emotionally and financially, because in 2019 I was sadly detained by my husband after I came from work, being a police officer. And then when I entered my house, I asked my grandchild why he didn't wash the phone. Now he started teaching me why am I asking the children not doing. Now when I went to the SACS to report the case, and then they said I must go to the hospital because of my injuries. They can't open the case without a PPE. Then I went to the hospital, the doctor did everything. And then I waited for the case number for 3 weeks. Then when I didn't get the case number, then I went to Dr. Jim's police station where I opened the case and asked why am I not notified what is going on with my case. And then they said, this case was never registered, so I must go and inquire in the registered court. I went to court, and then the prosecutor there, when we checked his documents, he said it doesn't appear to have been appeared before court, so I must go back to Dr. Jim. Then I said, no, I can't go to SACS because they said I must go to court. I went to the IP and reported this case. I found a person being arrested, and then after that, he doesn't go before the court and be in charge. And then the IP said, must go back. In fact, they called the SACS Dr. Jim. Then I went back to Dr. Jim, and then they said, no, I must go to court again. Then I went to court. I saw the senior prosecutor there, who then informed us that, in fact, my husband asked the prosecutor that he wants to go home, visit my home, and then to admit what he has done. And then it never happened. Then I went back to court to say, I want to proceed this court because this husband of mine, he seems as if he has done nothing. Mm. Then in court, they said the prosecutor agreed with the lawyer now of my husband. They took me out of court and said, no, you must leave me. I asked, why must I leave it? Because this husband of mine, he doesn't do what you are instructing him to do. Instead, you ask me to do the thing of going to my home, and then you must apologize. And then the case it never went before court to 2019, 2020. Then I went to the station commissioner in Dr. and asked why my case is not proceeding. And then he said, no, the investigator is no more.
Sure.
Then I went to court, eventually went to court, and then in court they said we must mediate because the magistrate who was doing this court is not here. Like my case is not proceeding. It's not proceeding.
And what is your perspective then on the system holding perpetrators accountable? Where you sit right now, having gone through this ordeal just to get to this point?
You know, sir, this was a justice system. It traumatizes me because it seems that they care about the perpetrators more than the suspect. Because how can a prosecutor arrange for mediation, whereas there is blood here, I'm injured, like I even went to hospital to be admitted for depression, but she is insisting that there must be mediation. And even the docket, it's not GPA, it's common assault. Whereas there are pictures, there is a report from the doctor. Now it seems as if this justice system is really depriving the women of South Africa. And even those who doesn't know what to do, the court always protected the suspect. Like now, I'm not staying at my house because of this man and because of his taxi owner. Maybe because of his industry, I don't know what is he doing then, or the acceptance, I don't know. But me, I'm standing because I'm a woman of South Africa. I'm fighting. I'll die tomorrow because of the system of South Africa, the justice system, who doesn't give sentence to these people and put the message to the suspect that women abuse is not right in South Africa.
Yeah. You're a JMPD officer yourself, so you are within the system itself. How, in your view, do you think the system can be effectively improved as far as accountability is concerned?
I think the justice system must really take care of the victim and really employ or make sure that those people who are investigating, who are dealing with the cases of women and children, they are really trained and know what they are doing. Because it seems as if the investigating officers and whoever who's dealing with cases like this, they don't have much knowledge of what is expected of them in this case of women abuse. So they must make sure that the officers or whoever is dealing with this is properly trained and is passionate about his work. And this corruption thing, because my husband was bragging that you think you're an officer, I know the law, and we must go to court. And then when the community, because even the community of Transisha was engaged in this, they even went to court to find out why this person is dragging, why this perpetrator is not put before court. And then the prosecutor, they were saying, okay, you must go to court on that and see.
Yeah. We're seeing there some of the images of the extent of the injuries that Nellies suffered at the hands of her husband, as you're seeing there. And this is a matter that she's saying has been dragging on for a while. Lisa, let me just bring you in here. I mean, is this a story that you too often hear of in these matters where the social norms and power dynamics within communities and even in our institutions may prevent actually women from accessing the justice that they need to access?
Yes, I think the criminal justice system in relation to domestic violence works particularly poorly. If you look at the department's own statistics and you compare those for rape with those for domestic violence, you can actually see that they're dealing with rape better than they're dealing with domestic violence. We have well over 100,000, close to 200,000 reports of domestic violence coming into the criminal courts every year, but there are probably only about 2,000 that make it to trial. It really is that bad. So I think there's a real need to understand why we are losing so many women at so many points. Well, I think we can hear why that's happening and pay much more attention to how we fix the system in order to keep women in. And sometimes it's also about providing better protection to them. You know, quite often women lay charges and they are then threatened by their partners if they persist or if they continue. And so women withdraw out of fear, or there's an economic dependence, or they've been pressurized and they've been promised all sorts of things, not only by their partner but also by his family. So there's a need to think about how do we provide comprehensive support to women who are in abusive relationships. We can't just leave them in a position where they're reliant on the criminal justice system only. We also need to put in place comprehensive systems of social support. So Nellies is employed, but for those women who aren't employed and who are economically dependent, what do we offer in terms of alternative housing? What are we offering in terms of giving women good access to employment schemes, job training, and the like? And I think the other thing she's also pointing to, the areas we really aren't paying enough attention to is the health system. Yeah. There are many women who get picked up by emergency services who go into casualty, and nobody ever asks them, and I can say this having done the research, most of the time nobody ever says to those women, even if they're seeing them 3 times in a period of 2 months, nobody says, who hit you? It's just recorded injuries, and then the fact that they gave them Panado, stitched them up if they needed, and then sent them home. So at this point, we've got a system that's very focused on the criminal justice system, which is not working very well. And we've got very little to also support and ensure that for those women who are wanting to pursue and who are wanting to go ahead, they're also getting the support to be able to do that.
Yeah. Do we have evidence-based, effective gender-based violence prevention interventions is the question we're asking tonight. On Twitter, @Newsroom405. Otherwise, you can send us your WhatsApp comments now, 072-110-5584. The newsfeed late night continues for you in a moment. We have with us gender and social activist Lebo Ramafuku. She's joined by research and project consultant at the University of Johannesburg, Lisa Vetten, gender-based violence survivor Nellies Jiva, and Tamara Matebula, the chairperson of CGE. Stay with us. The newsfeed continues next. Back with you on the news feed late night tonight, addressing the current interventions in gender-based violence and are they effective? We started, of course, looking at the strategy of accountability within the system. We'll come back and touch on the others as well. I have with me tonight in this conversation gender and social activist Lebo Ramafuku. She is joined there by Lisa Vetten, and we have a victim, a gender-based violence survivor, Nellies Jiva, also part of this conversation. And also joining us tonight in the conversation, Tamara Matebula, the chairperson of CGE. Auslebu, let me bring you in here. We started at the accountability within the system and improving accountability within the system. And we started by asking that question of power dynamics within the system, where you find the same actors defining and controlling the monitoring response and the dispensing of justice within this process. Just tackle that for us and how effective that has been.
Well, I think in a culture of lack of accountability across the system, then you really do not find that anybody is held accountable. It's very sad that we are listening to this story, and I feel very ashamed that it is many stories that are similar. I've intervened in cases where actually the women that have laid a charge were arrested because they dared ask at the courts whether or not their case had been pursued or they were opposing bail. So you've got a system that itself is violent against women, and women are punished for speaking for speaking out. And that happens alongside a culture of a poor policing, poor following up of cases, and a lack of accountability. In fact, women almost, when their cases, they have met a responsible investigating officer, and they almost feel like, oh my goodness, something out of the ordinary has happened because of the experiences that they face. But earlier on, you also asked the issue of prevention. And I do think that, we need to be thinking about what do we mean by prevention and at what levels does prevention happen. And I think, unfortunately, in this country, we basically have left so many systems as Lisa said, that could support women not working properly for women. So for an example, the criminal justice system is a very, very complex system for any woman who has been abused to navigate. Now, we live in a patriarchal society that already judges any woman, you know, for reporting. If you are reporting against a famous man or an ex-husband, you are a gold digger. If you report after many months or many years, why were you not reporting? So what we are seeing is that for many women, even going to report, there is so many hurdles that they've got to jump. And for those who report, just having paralegals working with them, helping them navigate the system could be an intervention that could help. Other NGOs have demonstrated that that strategy would work, but we have not seen a government that takes that strategy, trains paralegals. The whole issue of the Tutuzela care centers, we are not expanding them. Where when a woman has been raped, your first cause of concern is one, to make sure that they get psychosocial support, but also to make sure that as women, they do not destroy the evidence that is there. But we are also, as a nation, not in the culture of having social consequences. In fact, we almost look around to check who's going to say, you know, the first word. When a man, particularly a famous man, is alleged to have, perpetrated gender-based violence. So our own cultures are basically saying that you dare not speak out. And many women, even those that are in domestic abuse circumstances, the time that is the most risky for them to leave is when they are leaving their partners. And we don't have a system that is held accountable when they fail, like in the case that we've just listened to, but in many other cases. In fact, what women report is that from the time they enter the police station or the court system, all the time, in some instances from security guards, will be the ones that are treating them in such a way that it will dissuade them from reporting gender-based violence. So the system is broken. It's broken in many places.
I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to you in a moment, Ma'am Tamara. I just want to bring you in here as far as the accountability system is concerned. How do we remove, right, the very same people who are viewed in society as the perpetrators from being the ones who are controlling the systems of monitoring, the systems of reporting, and the system of holding others accountable?
Thank you very much for having me. And again, I just want to say that, yes, we are discussing quite a very complex topic tonight, which is around domestic violence and gender-based violence, which is an abuse that is profound and commonly widespread in the country. And we have monitored cases as part of the Commission for Gender Equality and as part of and as a watchdog who has powers to actually watch and look at cases that are happening in different courts. And we sometimes do attend those court cases as friends of the courts, just to look at how cases are dealt with. So in many instances, you will find that in courts, for an example, perpetrators themselves will actually be given a sentence that is not equal to the crime that the person has actually committed. And this has actually brought us to look at a number of things. For an example, the Commission for Gender Equality has actually looked at how the South African police system is working in terms of making sure that the people who are perpetrating violence against women are actually taken to book. And we have looked at the criminal justice system. We have actually looked at the laws and the legislations, because you will find that the older laws and legislations that we have or that we had in South Africa were actually lax in terms of making sure that perpetrators themselves are held accountable of the crimes that they commit. I just want to say that at this instance, I would want to remind all our listeners out there that recently we have just looked at the 3 bills, and these 3 bills are very important to actually talk about, because these 3 bills are basically the bills that are beginning to say that we need to make sure that we hold perpetrators accountable, because the victims and the survivors of violence, like Nellies, have not actually been given, the rights that they deserve. For an example, the first bill that is out there that has been reviewed recently is the Domestic Violence Act, number 116 of 1998. The second one is the Criminal Law, Sexual Offences as well as Related Matters Amendment Act number 32 of 2007. And we have also reviewed another act which is called Criminal and Related Matters Amendment Bill, Bill number 17 of 2020. All these 3 bills are beginning to look at issues of perpetrators of violence against women. And one of the things that are quite key and important is that these perpetrators, for an example, in one of the bills, is basically saying that the perpetrators themselves must be entered into the national register. And that register will actually make sure that even if you are looking for a job, you are applying for a job, whether you are in South Africa or you are applying for a job outside the borders of this country, that you are already in this register that says that when they do the checks and balances, they can actually see that you have once been, a person that is or has perpetrated this kind of violence, either against women, against young women, or against children. The second part was that the bill itself, or the bills, were also looking at the fact that there should be harsher sentences. We should look at issues of bail, because people were given bail. You will find that the perpetrator will commit a crime today, the following day or the following week, the person is outside in the streets, and coming back to boast to the very same family to say, look at me, I'm outside. What were you trying to do? Or we'll go basically to the very same person or victim to say, there's nothing you can do. The law is on my side.
I want to come back and ask a question. Do these bills address, for example, the issue that Lisa is raising, that prevention of conflict related to sexual violence might be seeing some level of improvement where there is very limited focus that is given to other forms of gender-based violence, such as what we're talking about now, intimate partner violence? But let's take a break. When we come back, we'll tackle that. Meanwhile, let's help as we have this conversation, by the way. The hotline to call, helpline is the correct word. A gender-based violence helpline number is 0800 428 428. You can send a please call me as well. And the facility is star 120 star 7867 hash. And if you need immediate help right now, those are the facilities and services available to can respond to your situation. And we'll talk a little bit about the effectiveness of those facilities and the catering, the services that we are catering for right now as far as our interventions are concerned. Let's get your views tonight at Newsroom 405 on 072 110 5584. The Newsfeed Late Night continues next. Welcome back. We continue with you now here on the Newsfeed Late Night. Our conversation tonight seeking to address the current strategies to deal with gender-based violence. Are they effective? And we're looking at accountability systems, but also we want to just look at some of the designed services that are out there in facilities and whether or not they are responding effectively. So before the break, Mam Tamara, you were talking about the 3 bills, and my question is, when the bills are put together and they are forwarded, the law is made, is consideration being made as far as the question of responding to other forms of violence meted up against women and girls and children that is not sexual in nature, including that of intimate partner violence?
Yes, I must say that, the answer is yes. There is consideration in terms of including some forms of violence, like intimate partner violence, which is in short called IPV. For an example, Lisa earlier talked about how, you will find that, partners that are in this intimate partnership would actually go back to the police stations or to court to withdraw some of the, cases that have been reported because of many reasons that she mentioned. I think these bills, in terms of accountability, are looking at all of those issues because these are the gaps that we have actually looked at in terms of, the previous bills or the previous acts or legislative frameworks we're not addressing in detail. So we are looking at the gaps as we develop those bills, as we, put the bills in front of Parliament, for approval and for actually changing them into laws. And I think as we move forward, some of the institutions like the justice system, the courts, the police stations, and everybody else will actually look at those pieces of legislation in terms of application and moving forward.
Lisa, let's talk then about the rebuilding of family and community support structures. In other words, building the local capacity and community engagement. How far have we gone, and the strategies being implemented right now? I know there are various dialogues that are being held that seek to have men be a part of the conversation, because communities do believe that men being a part of the conversation will be a part of the solution. How consistent are we with that, and how effective have they been?
The evidence for that is very mixed. I think there's sometimes too much reliance on dialogue, and I think it's based on a bit of a simplistic assumption that if I go and sit in a conversation one afternoon for an hour and a half, suddenly I'll see the light, I'll fall on my knees and say, that's it, I'm converted, I will never ever be violent again. That's utterly mistaken. Usually violence has become a learned behavior. It's the way you deal with your difficulties in your life. You don't know how else to deal with the difficulties in your life. And an hour and a half is not going to change that. So the kinds of things that do work tend to be sustained programs that are run over a period of months that provide a great deal of support in terms of behavior change. We don't have enough of those kinds of programs. We keep jumping to the easy solutions, the 1.5 hour PowerPoint presentations or the community dialogues or whatever they may be. So I think when we go to look at where we have got some research on the effectiveness of programs, they tell us it's actually really hard in some ways to change men's behavior. I'll speak of one that was done very recently. It's one run by Sonke, it's been well studied. And I think that's very useful because it starts to tell us where the weaknesses and strengths of these programs lie. So for instance, they ran it in Bushbuck Ridge. The evaluators there said, yes, it showed some signs of promise. They saw definite changes in men's attitudes. They then went and ran the same program in Diepsloot. And what was of deep concern was that it might have made some change in the least violent men, but it actually also appeared to have made the most violent men even more violent. So what that's telling us is we can't be glib about behavior change. We have to think long and hard about the kinds of programs we run, and we can't just run them because there's a possibility that we may be making things worse in some instances.
Is there an opportunity, though, to hit the pause button and say, hold on, this is how we've been doing it, this is what research is telling us, let's change tack? Or do we just keep thundering ahead on this train and there is no chance or an opportunity to turn things around?
We absolutely must stop and think. This is not a free-for-all and a juggernaut where just because I've got a bright idea, I should be allowed to go out and do it. No, you should have some evidence that what you're doing is effective. I mean, you can't be running programs that are putting women's lives at risk. That's clearly unethical. So I think there is a need for us to be thinking slowly and carefully. Just as we say that the police should be accountable for the way they deal with women, so should those who run programs also be accountable. At a minimum, they should at least be thinking about what they're doing and putting monitoring systems in place in order to see if they are effective. That's part of being responsible and, as a first principle, doing no harm. So I think, one of the things, because we are so concerned about violence against women, I think there's a real urgency to want to get out and do something now. And if you're not doing something right now, then it means you're not showing the necessary concern about the problem. But actually, it is necessary for us to sit back and think and try. And I'm not suggesting that we sit here and think for the next 10 years, but I think that we do try to look and learn from what is working, and we are getting some indications of what does work and what doesn't work, and then using that and putting out very clear guidelines around programming, for example, as to what is effective and what is not effective. Yeah. And I think also strongly trying to push the idea that you can't just do things in a vacuum. You can't just parachute in, run your afternoon's dialogue, then leave having ticked your little box saying you've gone and prevented violence against women because you did your dialogue. So I think there is a need for us to be thinking more carefully and more critically about what we're doing and issuing guidance. And perhaps that's where we were a little bit weak, right, is issuing those guidelines around what is effective and what is not.
Aslebu, let's talk then about part of what we need to be doing in our strategies, and that is the changing of socio-cultural norms. And the approach then in broad terms is let's empower women and girls more. That strategy and its effectiveness.
Well, I think that the situation is complex, and I think for me, it is important to empower young women and girls. And I think some of the gains that we have seen is because we have empowered women and girls. We come from a culture where people were not speaking up about gender-based violence because it is difficult from the stories that you have heard, to a culture where more and more people are speaking. But I think when people speak, what is the support then that they get? I think what is happening in our societies is that there is a large tolerance for behavior that leads to violence that does not get mediated in any particular manner. Yeah. So, for me, it's not only even having programs at community level, but what is the content of those programs? So, for an example, programs that speak about men protecting women, I want to problematize them because what are you protecting them from? We need programs that help men to introspect and reflect on their own behavior. But we also need societal structures that then support simple issues like parenting. There is evidence that if you strengthen parenting, if you strengthen people's ability to parent, in the long term, you basically can make a difference. When I was at Soul City, programs that we ran at schools, Soul Buddies clubs, show that if you do that, you support both girls and both boys to do this work. Boys need mentoring, where you start working with them at a younger age, and you probably work with older men. But there are no social consequences, you see, for this kinds of behaviors that we see. And I think, we can talk about the laws, we can talk about legislation, but for as long as it is acceptable that even at a point where a man is employed, they are being paid to offer a service to a woman, what informs them, the values that informs them, means that when you come, they can say, why don't you apologize? Why don't you do that? Means that we are operating within a system where we are not dealing with the cultural norms that exist. We are not dealing with cultural norms that are even informed by religion and informed by so many things to problematize them and to speak about them. Yeah. But I think as a country, we also don't have follow-up. And I don't know whether it was Lisa or Tamara, we are looking for easy, quick fixes because we see change as linear. My belief is that I agree that we must evaluate. We also, because of the needs of funding, do not run things to test, and when they don't work, we change course in the middle. And we say, let us try other things. Everybody is just in this rush to implement. But more importantly, I think for me, we are going to have to accept that we are going to have to question a number of social norms that exist, and we are going to have to then support programs that do that.
Let's question one before we go on a break, because you've mentioned this a number of times. There is no social consequence, right? One of the social norms is people go on social media now to get social consequence. They feel somewhat if they go and put that story out there, publish the gory details, the pictures and so on and so forth, there will be some degree of social consequence. Where does that come from, and is it an effective way? And have people been getting results out of that?
Well, in the absence of any other intervention, that is what you do. But in fact, look at the Rhodes reference list, where women said, these are the men in our institutions who are raping us. It is the women that were excluded and the men got to graduate. But I guess what I'm saying is that there is a growing impatience and lack of trust on the institutions that are there to protect women, whether it's at universities, in workplaces, in communities. Hence, it goes to social media. But if social media was a measure of where our social norms are, even in that, look at what happened this weekend with all the news of all the famous men who, have abused women. The majority is a backlash that says the woman is a gold digger, the woman is dramatic. So it shows you where the temperature in our society is around the kinds of things that are happening. And we are not seeing many of them, including in our so-called leaders, calling them out.
We have with us gender and social activist Leborah Mafoko, joined alongside them by the research and project consultant at the University of Johannesburg, Lisa Benton, gender-based violence survivor Nellies Njiva, and Tamara Matabula, who is the chairperson of the Commission for Gender Equality. That number once again for your help tonight, 0800 428 428. You can also use the Please Call Me facility with *120 *7867 hash. Those are some of the services available to respond to your situation and intervene at that level. We'll continue next and look at your WhatsApp messages here on the Newsweek Late Night. Stay with us. Welcome back. A conversation tonight evaluating the effectiveness of our strategies and gender-based violence intervention programs. And we're taking your views tonight at Newsroom 405 on WhatsApp 072-110-584. Before we get there, Tamara, let's talk about one of the 5 key areas of intervention that you are looking at. And one of them is the urgent responses to victims and survivors of gender-based violence. And I keep going to the helpline and the WhatsApp facility that is made available. Talk to us about the services that cater for the needs as well as how they are designed and whether or not it is effective, and those facilities that we talk about, Tutuzela centers, for example, and whether those facilities are adequate enough.
Yes. Yes, we do have services that are available for survivors of gender-based violence in South Africa. And we have actually looked at the state of the shelters. We have produced a report as the Commission for Gender Equality on the status of shelters in the country. And we looked at the shelters in all 9 provinces. And this was actually sparked by the fact that, survivors of gender-based violence actually submitted complaints to the Commission for Gender Equality about the status of those shelters. And if you look at our report, basically that we have shared with quite a number of stakeholders and the Department of Social Development as the key funder of many of these shelters, as well as the Tutuzela care centers that are managed by the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. They show that the report actually tells us that the state in those shelters is not good enough. First, because the resources that are allocated to those shelters aren't enough. You will find that they don't cater, for an example, for women who sometimes run away from their comfortable homes with children or with a child, and you will find that there is only one single bed that is catering for a woman and not with a child or children. And I want to also just remind, our viewers out there to say that, some of the shelters were not directly funded by government. So they were receiving funding from local funders and or international funders. And the funding that came from government was actually not coming in time. And you will find that in between, the disbursements that were erratic, the shelters were not properly run. And again, the Tutuzela care centers in South Africa, you will find that there aren't enough. And I think we did make recommendations that we should actually have more of these Tutuzela care centers, as well as the shelters for women, particularly women in rural areas, because most of the shelters that we looked at in the Tutuzela care centers are based in urban areas, and women who actually are facing violence in rural areas have nowhere to run to. And if they have to travel long distances to be able to access those shelters. And again, we looked at the status of, police stations in terms of accommodating, victims, and as well as women who come to report, that they have been victimized one way or the other. And you will find that some of those police stations are not equipped with, private rooms to actually allow women to report and to speak to police who are trained to actually listen and open the cases and help open the cases for survivors of gender-based violence. So I must say that services that are out there are not adequate to actually assist women as well as children who run away from their abused partners at home. So we are looking at all of those issues, and we are working closely with government in terms of making sure that there are more shelters that are developed. And currently we are speaking with ministers who are also promising us that definitely there will be some buildings that are not used that will actually be converted, and these buildings will be converted into places of shelter, and we are looking at the halfway houses, and the white door houses, right, for women to actually stay there for some time.
Let's take some WhatsApp messages coming through tonight. This one from Nondumiso. It says, I am also a survivor of gender-based violence, but what is different is that the abuse was and still being done by my mother and stepfather. So it's very bad. I don't think we are making progress in curbing this pandemic. Sorry to hear that, Nondumiso. Evening, there is a slow approach by the justice system to protect women and children, and that's why the gender-based violence cases are not often reported. What needs to be done to see perpetrators arrested is the question from Justice. The criminal justice system on its own is intimidating and in most cases lacks empathy for gender-based violence victims. That is anonymous there on WhatsApp from Pat saying, Lebo Ramafuku, you hit the nail on the head about paralegals. They are assisting even in difficult conditions due to lack of resources. Thank you very much for those messages coming through tonight. Do we have a commonly agreed upon standard or guideline to evaluation of these gender-based violence prevention programs? Lisa?
Well, I suppose most people, for them, the standard is that violence stops. But I think one probably needs to be a lot more subtle than that, because you would need to also sometimes allow at least up to 2 years after a program to see if the program, if your program really did work. You can't always rely on the effects that that a program has immediately afterwards being sustained. So you've got to actually be able to measure them over a period of time. You've also got to look at them across a range of different dimensions. So some of the prevention programs are interesting in that they have some effect on men, but nobody yet seems to have come up with a program that suggests they have an equally positive effect on women. So I think Lebo's point about the fact that we should not stop looking at how we support and open up options for women and girls remains important and remains a priority. But I think there's another thing that we should be looking at as well. I just want to pick up on something Tamara said. So I worked in a program last year with others for the Departments of Planning, Monitoring, Evaluation, the Department of Social Development, where we actually identified a set of core services addressing GBV. So it recommended and costed paralegals at all courts. It costed services at all police stations. It costed services at all hospitals. It costed services in counselling centres, and it gave a cost to shelters. It set out a basket and it gave it a cost. That was approved last year. It was finished in September. It's now May. It still hasn't been, I don't even know if it's gone to Cabinet, because apparently it has to go to Cabinet. So it hasn't been approved by Cabinet, which means that when our financial year started, all those services who were waiting for DSD to get their subsidies, it's now too late. Once again, insufficient money will have been put aside to have provided this full range of services. So it's those kinds of things, because we have We have the research in place. We have the information in place. It just doesn't get acted on. And the fact that I can't explain why, but the fact that it's a cabinet and it's the highest level decision-making body in the country and it's stuck there, that truly does alarm me. So I think it's not just talking about the police the officer at low level. It's all the way up to the top to cabinet where we need to be asking and demanding answers.
Nellies, having heard the conversation tonight, and you brought your story, and we've looked at some of the information that is now available, some of the research experts giving us what the interventions are doing. Does it give you any sense of hope, Nellies, that your particular matter will get resolved at some point? Nellies, are you still there?
Hello?
Yes, Nellies, I'm saying, having listened to the conversation from the researchers and the information that is available from activists and the gender, the Commission for Gender Equality, do you get a sense or some hope that your matter will be resolved at all?
Yes, I do get a hope there, because it seems to me as if the system, I don't know whether I'm afraid the government or the system, they want to react. They want somebody to suffer so that they can react. But I think the justice system today, as from today onwards, they will learn that whatever they are doing, they must do it in a way that the victims must get help from them.
Yeah. And the victim getting help from the community as well. I mean, what is your sense of how your community is capacitated to respond to your challenges?
You know that the community must get involved with the justice system. In fact, all the stakeholders that are within around our area, they must come together and form a part whereby this gender-based violence, they will make sure that they are tackled in a right manner, so that the victims must get help.
Yeah. What do you mean in the right manner? Like
sometimes in my case, the community went to the suspect to talk with him. And then he said the case must go to the court because he is a suspect.
Yeah.
And then in court, the magistrate and the prosecutor, they are saying to me, I must withdraw this case. There must be mediation.
Yeah, yeah. And so you're saying the community did not stand with you as a victim in this particular case?
They tried, but because of they are not above the law, like the magistrate and the prosecutor, they are the ones who've got powers more than the community.
Okay, Nellies, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for sharing your story with us here today. Aslebu, Sis Tamara, as well as Lisa Vetton, appreciate you coming through today and being a part of the conversation. Of course, we appreciate you sending us your views tonight. Speaking of gender-based violence, in a moment here on the Newsfeed Late Night, we'll have a conversation with the Democratic Alliance. They are tomorrow going to debate this important issue of DNA backlogs, which is a crisis for the South African Police Service. We'll get more details on that, which really links very much to the question of gender-based violence and rape cases and the collection of DNA. Let me remind you that number again for your help, 0800 428 428. Otherwise, you can send a please call me to the facility, hashtag 120 star, that's rather star 120 star 7867 hash. Thank you very much for the conversation tonight. The Newsfeed Late Night continues in a moment with a recap of what's making news.